And Larry Merchant always had a way of summing things up. You know, the way that he would have his little monologue before a fight to sum things up perfectly, and he would find the right things to say between rounds and to sum things up at the end. He was a great guy, still alive, isn't he? But I think he's very elderly and obviously retired.
No,
He was a hell of a writer as well, Larry Merchant.
yeah. It's interesting. Obviously, sadly, obviously we lost George Foreman a couple of weeks ago, and this was a decade where he made his comeback.
Yeah.
How many fights did he have, or how long was it from his first comeback fight to when he had an actual serious test, which I imagine was against Jerry Cooney?
Yeah, well, he was been coming back. I can't remember the dates now, but he came around about 87.
Yeah.
It may be 86, 87, because he'd been out of the ring 10 years, a good 10 years. And he got back on it, didn't he? He launched that comeback in the same way that a novice pro would, fighting low-level opponents and fighting frequently to shake off the rust and some of the weight. So he was very, very busy during those first 3 years. And you're right, his first test would have been around Jerry Cooney. I think he might have fought Adilson Rodriguez maybe before Cooney, but that wasn't as high profile as Cooney. And Cooney would have been 90, 91, because he got to Evander in 92, wasn't it? I think, George. So yeah, in those first few years, he wouldn't have fought anyone of any significance, George, and no one would have been taking him seriously, although he obviously was getting some coverage because of his name. You know, I'm sure he was on the cover of Ring magazine around that time. And if you think about it, there was talk of him fighting Mike Tyson in 1991. So clearly he had reached the stage where people were thinking, could this happen? You know, the edge had been taken off Tyson by his defeat to Buster Douglas, and people knew that Tyson was on the slide, and Foreman had proved that he still had the punch, and he was this big man who wasn't going to be intimidated. So yeah, I can't remember the specifics of his comeback in those probably those first 3 years of his comeback, but he was knocking over essentially a series of men with probably as many losses on their record as wins, which is the traditional way of doing it for many.
Well, yeah, indeed. If we take Holmes and Tyson out of this next question, who would be your top three heavyweights of the 80s?
Top three underneath Holmes and Tyson.
Mm-hmm.
It would be Tim Witherspoon, Greg Page, and I think you'd probably have to give it to Pinkton Thomas, but I'd like to put Mike Weaver in there because I got a soft spot for Mike Weaver. But I mean, there's lots of good fighters, but they're all flawed fighters. So you could make a case for a lot of guys. You could make a case for Tony Tubbs. He's thought of, you know, these days a lot because of his 2-round capitulation against Mike Tyson. But I mean, he was a really good boxer with fast hands, good engine, not a great body shape, but he was a really good boxer. Never really allowed to develop, and not with the real aptitude or attitude for the sport. But I think Tim Witherspoon would be my number one. You know, we've talked about the challenge he gave to Larry Holmes, came close to winning that fight. Then coming off that fight, when Holmes gave up the WBC title, Witherspoon beat Greg Page, and that demonstrated probably the difference between the two of them. Greg Page had the amateur experience, but Witherspoon was the aggressor and out-muscled and out-punched Greg Page. But again, Witherspoon wasn't the full package. Witherspoon was far too easily discouraged. You know, they didn't have the staying power. A lot of those guys, it seems to me, yes, they were getting ripped off by Don King, but the difference was, you know, Larry Holmes, he got ripped off by Don King, but he just kept going. He felt like, well, if I keep winning, I'll keep earning money anyway. Whereas Tim Witherspoon will get ripped off by Don King and just think, well, what's the point of him carrying on? And that's understandable, but it's not going to get you. It's not going to get you to where you need to be when that was the structure that you were stuck with. So I would say Greg Page was possibly the most talented fighter of that era, underneath the top two. But again, he would have rather been playing basketball. But his skill set was in boxing. I love Mike Weaver. Mike Weaver always turned up in shape. He always had a chance of knocking you out, but he was also vulnerable as well. So yeah, I'm skirting around naming 3 specific names. I think I can comfortably say Witherspoon, then Page. I mean, we'll say Witherspoon, Page, and then Pingdon Thomas. Pingdon Thomas at his peak, very brief peak, was a tough fighter. He could go 12 rounds, dynamite jab, decent right hand behind it, and resilient.